A drawn curtain, a final breath, and then nothing. The man was gone. Welcome to Revenge Oath. I'm your moderator, Conan Doyle. Where are you watching from? Share it in the comments below. Your thoughts bring the mystery alive. Thank you for being here. It was on one of those grey London afternoons in late November, when the city seemed suspended in a dull fog, and the fire in our Baker Street hearth did more to light the sitting room than the feeble rays that struggled through the window, that Sherlock Holmes received a most curious visitor. Holmes was lounging in his usual chair, violin resting upon his knee, the strings idly touched but not bowed. I had just returned from a brisk walk through Regent's Park and was shaking droplets of drizzle from my coat when Mrs. Hudson knocked and ushered in a man of unusually theatrical appearance. He was tall and angular, clad in a velvet cloak with a flamboyant red silk lining that flared as he moved. A wide-brimmed hat, somewhat worse for wear, was clutched in his gloved hands. His eyes were large and expressive, and his mustache swept dramatically to each side, as though sculpted with deliberate artistry. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he inquired in a voice that carried with the weight of stage-trained projection. "I am Ronald Stratton, director and principal actor of the King's Regent Theatre. I come, sir, not with a matter of theatrics, but of grave and mystifying reality." Holmes inclined his head. "Pray be seated, Mr. Stratton. And if you would begin, perhaps, not with the nature of your profession, but with the nature of your alarm." Stratton sat, his cloak pooling around him like a curtain. "It is Frederick Wensley, sir," he said. "My leading man. Last night, he vanished, during a performance. Not before it, not after. During." Holmes raised a single eyebrow, an expression I had long come to associate with the scent of something intellectually appetizing. "Do you mean he exited the stage and failed to return?" I asked, drawing up a chair opposite him. "No, Dr. Watson," Stratton said gravely. "I mean that Mr. Wensley walked through the heavy damask curtain of Scene 3 on cue, as scripted, and did not emerge on the other side. He vanished, quite literally, into thin air." A moment of silence passed. I exchanged a glance with Holmes, who appeared almost amused. "Perhaps, then," Holmes said softly, "you are suggesting that the curtain has become a portal of some kind." "I suggest nothing, Mr. Holmes," Stratton said tensely. "Only that the man has disappeared without trace, before an audience of over 600 people." Holmes steepled his fingers beneath his chin. "Continue." Stratton leaned forward. "It was opening night of The Prince and the Poisoned Chalice, a melodrama of some flair, if I may say so. Wensley played the doomed Duke of Elverton. During the third scene, he is to storm into the banquet hall through the main curtain, deliver a soliloquy, and collapse after sipping from the chalice. The lighting dimmed, the music swelled, the cue was struck. Wensley strode into the folds of the red curtain, and nothing. The cue passed, the scene stumbled. When we pulled back the curtain, he was gone. No sign of him backstage?" I asked incredulously. "None," said Stratton. "No movement in the wings, no sound. We searched the trapdoors, the corridors, the costume rooms, even the cellar beneath the orchestra pit. The theater was locked and patrolled. There was simply nowhere he could have gone." Holmes stood abruptly and moved to the fireplace, and no member of the audience noticed anything unusual. "There was confusion, naturally," Stratton said. "We delayed the act, assumed illness or a missed cue, but after 20 minutes, we had to close the performance. I had to speak to the crowd myself. This morning I went to Wensley's flat. His landlady has not seen him since the night before last. Scotland Yard was informed, but the constable who visited shrugged and said he would likely turn up. Mr. Holmes, I know the theater. I know every stage trick and ghost light illusion. This was not that." Holmes turned to him slowly. "I believe, Mr. Stratton, you have brought us a case most unusual, one that demands immediate inspection." He glanced at me with a flicker of excitement in his eyes. "Watson, would you care to accompany me to the King's Regent Theatre this evening? It seems the Duke of Elverton has exited stage left, never to return. The hansom cab that bore Holmes and me from Baker Street to the King's Regent Theatre rattled through rain-slicked streets as the last light of day faded into the dense, gaslit murk of a London evening. Holmes, ever still and withdrawn during travel, sat opposite me, fingertips pressed together and eyes closed in contemplation. I knew better than to interrupt him when his mind was at work. The theatre itself was situated on Wellington Row, a short walk from the Strand, a modest yet well-maintained structure nestled between a tobacconist's and a dismal-looking tailor. A pair of gas lamps flickered outside its portico, casting elongated shadows across the damp pavement. The sign above the arched entrance proclaimed in fading gilt King's Regent Theatre, The Prince and the Poisoned Chalice, a new drama by Ronald Stratton. Mr. Stratton, who had traveled ahead of us to prepare the stage, greeted us with a quick bow and ushered us through a side entrance. He had exchanged his flamboyant attire for a simple woolen coat, but the theatricality still clung to him like grease paint. "I've asked that the company not rehearse this evening," he explained, as he led us through the corridor's dimly lit maze. "The staff remain, however, those who were present last night. I thought it best that you have the space to yourselves, Mr. Holmes." Holmes gave a curt nod. "Wise. The preservation of the scene is essential." The backstage of the theatre was cluttered and atmospheric. Coils of rope, shadowy stage flats, leaning against walls, discarded props, and the acrid smell of burnt oil from the footlights. The stage itself, empty now, looked like a hollow shell stripped of its illusion. The heavy red curtain, central to the mystery, hung motionless in its rigging. Stratton gestured toward it, solemnly. "There, Mr. Holmes, that is the curtain through which Wensley passed, and never emerged." Holmes approached the curtain with quiet reverence, much as a naturalist might approach a rare and unpredictable animal. He stood still before it for a full minute, then reached out and passed his hand along the fabric. It was thick damask, faded slightly with age, but richly woven and entirely ordinary to the eye. "Pull it aside, if you would," he murmured. Stratton obeyed, drawing the folds wide. Behind it was only more of the same wooden floorboards, a few stacked flats, and a narrow corridor leading to the left wing. Holmes stepped through, and I followed, noting at once how confined the space became beyond the curtain, just wide enough for a single actor to move briskly from one entrance to another. "Watson," Holmes said, gesturing downward. "Observe." I looked and saw it, a faint smudge on the floor just inside the curtain's edge. Holmes bent swiftly, drew a magnifying lens from his coat, and examined it. A dark powder, the residue of stage cosmetics, rouge, or possibly burnt cork. Not remarkable in itself, except that it lies here, and not in the dressing room. And here, he moved a few feet forward, we find no further trace. It stops abruptly, as though the man simply evaporated. He turned on his heel and examined the wall. "These flats were in position last night." "Yes," said Stratton, unchanged. Holmes tapped the boards lightly with his cane, then stopped. "Although, Watson, help me move this one." We pushed aside a painted flat, a mock stone column, and revealed behind it a small door inset into the wall, one I might easily have mistaken for a structural support. Stratton gasped. "I have never seen that before." Holmes regarded him with a touch of amusement. "Nor would you. It's not meant to be seen. It is neither part of the set, nor of standard theater design. It has no handle, only a small indentation here." He pressed it gently, and with a soft click, the panel opened. Beyond it lay a cramped passage of bare stone, descending steeply into darkness. "Have you any idea where this leads?" I asked, a chill crawling across my spine. "None," Stratton said, his voice unsteady. That cannot have been part of the original theater. On the contrary," Holmes replied, "it very much can. Many of London's older theaters sit atop structures that predate them, warehouses, prisons, tunnels left from the days of the Great Fire. This, I believe, is one such relic." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small electric lantern, one of the newer pocket models he had recently taken to carrying. Switching it on, He advanced into the passage without hesitation. I followed, my footsteps muffled on the stone, the sound of Stratton's more reluctant tread echoing faintly behind. The tunnel was narrow and slightly damp, the walls lined with rough brick. After about 20 yards, we came to a fork, one path continuing straight, the other veering sharply to the right. Holmes paused, then crouched. Watson, here, on the stone. A scrape. And here, a thread of fabric caught on this broken edge. Black wool. The inner lining of a theatrical coat. I'd wager. He stood again, eyes alive with the thrill of pursuit. He came this way. And willingly, I think. There was no struggle, no signs of haste or resistance. But why? I murmured. Why walk into a hidden tunnel in the middle of a performance? That, said Holmes, is the right question. We followed the passage as it curved downward. At last it opened into a larger chamber, a low, barrel-ceilinged vault perhaps 20 feet square. Against one wall stood a battered writing desk and chair. On the desk, a hurricane lamp flickered with dying oil. Holmes moved swiftly forward and examined the items strewn atop the desk: papers, a porcelain cup, a length of cord, and a theater program from the very play in question. But it was the envelope placed precisely in the center that drew our attention. Holmes lifted it delicately. It was addressed in a bold hand. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, should you follow the trail? He broke the seal and extracted the single sheet within. It read, "You are clever, Mr. Holmes, but cleverness may yet prove fatal. Leave this stage to shadows and men who know their roles. Some curtains should never be drawn. A friend of the final..." Holmes read it aloud. We were all silent for a moment. Stratton was visibly pale. "This is madness. Are we to believe this was staged for you?" Holmes folded the letter and slipped it into his coat. "No," he said calmly. "Not for me. It was prepared in the event someone, anyone, should discover the tunnel. That it is addressed to me is merely a theatrical flourish." He turned to the wall behind the desk. "Now observe, gentlemen. There, almost hidden in the mortarwork, was another small panel, this one iron." Holmes opened it to reveal a narrow slit, barely large enough for a man to squeeze through sideways. The opening descended steeply, like a coal chute into blackness. "It is clear," he said quietly, "that Mr. Frederick Wensley did not vanish through a curtain. He stepped deliberately into an underworld that was ready for him, perhaps even built for him. The question now becomes, who lured him here and why?" He looked at me, the glint of reason mingled with something darker in his eyes. "The theater," he said softly, "is a place of illusion. But somewhere behind all this artifice lies a truth, and I intend to find it." We made our way back up the passage in silence. I could feel the weight of mystery settling more heavily upon us. The man had not vanished. He had descended into something. Whether it was a plot, a trap, or something even stranger, I could not say. But as Holmes re-emerged into the dim glow of the stage lights and paused to study the great red curtain once more, I could not help but feel we had only just stepped behind the first veil, and whatever lay beyond was still waiting. The return to Baker Street that evening was marked by an unusual silence. Holmes, never one for idle conversation after the scent of a case had begun to drift through his faculties, sat with eyes closed and hands steepled, deep in concentration. I refrained from speaking, though my mind was restless with questions. A man had walked through a curtain on a London stage and had vanished into a tunnel that should not have existed. And now Holmes, though outwardly calm, was calculating something, plotting movements not yet made, detecting ripples on the surface of events that to my eyes appeared still. Once back in our lodgings, he wasted no time. He did not remove his coat or sit beside the fire, but instead crossed directly to the desk and spread the strange letter addressed to him beside a map of central London. He kept folded and pinned within a drawer. From his bookshelf he produced a slim, leather-bound volume, which I recognized at once. Forgotten Subterranean Works of London by Sir Andrew Ruggles, a book Holmes had once referred to as the single most useful companion when a criminal prefers bricks to daylight. He ran a finger down the spine of the map, then traced a route with his thumb from the King's Regent Theatre toward the southern boundary of Covent Garden. The tunnel, he said aloud, though seemingly to himself, ran in a gentle arc toward the southeast. By its descent, it is not modern. It was not dug for theatrical convenience. It predates the theater by decades, perhaps longer. He glanced at me. Watson, have you ever heard of the Candle Lane debacle? I frowned. Only in passing, some fire or other, was it not? Indeed, a warehouse fire in 1843, but of particular interest because it exposed an illegal network of tunnels beneath several properties, used by smugglers and certain well-to-do persons to move things, goods, money, and on occasion people without the inconvenience of police attention. That network was believed sealed after the investigation, but as with all such matters in London, sealing one tunnel does not necessarily mean erasing the entire vein. You think the tunnel beneath the theater is part of that system? I do, and if so, it may connect to places quite unexpected. He tapped the cryptic note again. This message is not merely theatrical posturing. It hints at deliberate manipulation. A friend of the final act, note the phrasing. Not an enemy, not an agent. A friend, which implies the man we seek was not taken by force but rather drawn into a situation willingly if under false pretenses. A knock sounded. Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram on a silver tray. Holmes opened it, read swiftly, and handed it to me. From Inspector Lestrade, Scotland Yard. Missing actor Frederick Wensley. Report just received. Unidentified body found in alley behind Bow Street Station, male, late 30s. No identification but wearing theater costume. Request your presence immediately. Holmes was already reaching for his coat. Come, Watson, let us see if our Duke of Elverton has made his final bow. The alley behind Bow Street Station was cordoned off with a pair of constables keeping back a curious crowd. Lestrade met us with his usual mixture of professionalism and weariness, though his brow lifted slightly at Holmes' arrival. Thought you might want a look before we cart him to the morgue, he said. Poor devil was found by a milk boy making his deliveries. No purse, no theater mask, no papers, just this. He gestured to the body, which lay in a shallow depression between two soot-blackened brick walls. The face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. The man's garments were unmistakably theatrical. A velvet coat, slashed sleeves, and a satin cravat that had been loosened hastily, but it was the hands that drew Holmes's attention. These hands, he murmured, kneeling beside the body, stained with grease paint at the nails. These are the hands of a stage actor, calluses from holding a prop sword. Yes, and faint, blistering from wig adhesive. This is not Wensley. I blinked. Not, but surely. Holmes pointed to the man's hairline, where traces of spirit gum remained. A hastily removed wig. This man was impersonating Wensley, possibly as an understudy, or more likely as a decoy. Lestrade muttered a curse. So who's he then? Someone sent to be found, Holmes said, to draw attention, to cause confusion. A decoy death, meant for the police, not for me. Whoever staged this wanted the world to believe Wensley was dead, but left just enough inconsistency for me to know otherwise. He stood and brushed off his coat. Do you have the garments found on him? Not much, Lestrade said. One glove in his pocket, a handkerchief, and a torn page from a play script probably dropped during the scuffle. Holmes examined the script fragment under the alley lamp. It read, Duke, entering. Let none mistake this for fear. I drink not poison, but promise. The rest was torn. Familiar? I asked. Holmes nodded. A line from the third scene of The Prince in the Poisoned Chalice. But listen carefully. This version is subtly different from the one recited last night. He recited from memory. Duke, entering. Let none mistake this for fear. I drink not death but fate. Changed. Intentionally, I asked. Perhaps, Holmes replied. Or perhaps our man was rehearsing an alternate script. One, not meant for the audience, but for the private stage into which he walked. We returned to Baker Street past midnight. But Holmes was not yet finished. While I made tea and tried to organize my jumbled thoughts, he worked quickly, arranging the stage program, the cryptic letter, and the fragment of the altered script side by side on the floor. "There is a pattern here," he murmured. "A play performed in public, while another is acted in secret. A missing man, a duplicate corpse, and most curious of all, a hidden tunnel leading away not from danger but towards something planned." He looked up suddenly, his eyes glittering. "Watson, how many people knew the blocking of that performance, the precise moment Wensley would pass through the curtain?" I thought, well, the cast, the director, the stage manager, certainly, possibly the lighting technician. And if one of those persons orchestrated a vanishing act with real-world consequence under the guise of fiction, then we must ask, what was the purpose of removing Wensley at that exact moment? To make it appear he disappeared, I suggested. Or, Holmes said, rising to his feet, because someone needed Wensley to be somewhere else at that precise time. Not gone, not dead, but moved. He walked to the window and looked out over the gaslit street. "We shall visit the theater again tomorrow, Watson. This time not to examine the stage, but to speak to the players. And who are we to suspect?" Holmes turned, face expressionless. "Everyone who applauded at the final curtain." And with that cryptic remark, he extinguished the lamp and retired, leaving me alone with the lingering image of a man stepping through velvet folds, not into applause, but into shadows and schemes still concealed behind the playbill. Morning brought with it a hard, bright sky over Baker Street, the kind that made the chimneys look sharper and the fog seem momentarily banished. Holmes was already at the breakfast table when I emerged, his napkin untouched and his teacup cooling beside him. He was scanning the pages of the Theatrical Times, which I noticed he had annotated in several places with a short blue pencil. He glanced up as I entered, his expression unreadable. "Wensley's disappearance is more than a mere vanishing, Watson," he said. "It is a substitution, a trick within a trick. But it has been devised not for spectacle, but for purpose. The question we must now answer is who." Before I could respond, there was a knock. Mrs. Hudson handed Holmes an envelope on thick, cream-colored stock. He tore it open, revealing a formal card with an embossed seal. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, your presence is requested at a private audience today, at noon by Lady Sybil Cantlemere, in connection with the matter recently brought to your attention. Delivered on her ladyship's express instruction." Holmes folded the card slowly. "Lady Sybil Cantlemere," he said, more to himself than to me, the patroness of the King's Regent Theatre, an aristocrat with both social clout and financial stake in the production. That she has summoned me now suggests she either knows something or fears I soon shall. We arrived promptly at the Cantlemere townhouse on Cavendish Square, where a footman led us to a drawing room of vast proportions and ostentatious restraint. The curtains were of pale silk, the furniture lacquered and placed with military precision. Lady Sybil herself was a woman of no more than 50, but already carried herself with the controlled severity of someone born to influence. She rose, offered a gloved hand to Holmes, and acknowledged me with a gracious nod. Her voice was low and cultivated, each word pronounced with aristocratic care. "Mr. Holmes, I have resisted summoning you, for I find publicity, how shall I put it, distasteful, but circumstances have left me no choice. Mr. Stratton informs me you have unearthed certain matters beneath my theatre." Holmes inclined his head. "Madam, what I have unearthed is nothing compared to what lies concealed." Lady Sybil's eyes narrowed slightly. "I will speak plainly. Mr. Frederick Wensley was not merely an actor. He was, how shall I say it, engaged in certain affairs that made his presence both useful and precarious. I suspect he has not vanished, but has chosen to remove himself. I fear, however, that his disappearance places others at risk, including myself." Holmes's tone sharpened. "Risk of what nature?" Lady Sybil glanced to the door and waited until the butler had withdrawn. "Extortion," she said softly. "Or worse, exposure." There was an incident some months ago, a gathering at my country house, meant to be discreet. Several persons of rank attended, including 1 or 2 members of the Privy Council. Mr. Wensley was there, invited by another guest. I later learned he had made notes, that he had overheard, perhaps recorded certain conversations never intended for daylight. Blackmail? I asked. Not openly, Lady Sybil said, her gloved fingers tightening. But I heard whispers, small requests, hints of knowledge, the sort of pressure a man like Wensley might apply carefully, even elegantly. But 2 weeks ago, he became agitated. He claimed someone was watching him, that he'd been followed, leaving the theater. He stopped attending rehearsals regularly, then this vanishing. Holmes was silent for a moment, then stepped closer. Did Mr. Wensley ever name the person he feared? No, but I believe, she hesitated, that he was being manipulated. Someone with deeper motives, someone who used him, and then removed him when the use was complete. Holmes studied her intently. Madam, what happened at that gathering? Did it concern matters of state? She did not answer directly, but her silence was answer enough. Back on the street, Holmes walked swiftly, hands behind his back, chin lowered in thought. This case grows more complex by the hour. What was initially theatrical artifice now shows signs of political intrigue. We are not merely looking for a vanished man. We are navigating a game of leverage and secrecy. You believe Wensley was blackmailing someone powerful. I believe he was a pawn, Holmes said. But whether he played the game willingly or not remains unclear. What is certain is that someone removed him with surgical precision. The tunnel, the letter, the decoy corpse, all carefully timed. He stopped abruptly in front of a tobacconist's shop and gestured toward a nearby alley. That way leads back to the stage entrance. I propose we now speak to those who were closest to Wensley in the hours before his vanishing. Come, Watson. Let us visit the cast. Ronald Stratton met us backstage, thinner and more anxious than he had been the night before. He led us into a cramped dressing room now shared by several of the actors, who stood scattered amid racks of costumes and half-painted scenery flats. The scent of spirit gum and stale powder hung thick in the air. Holmes began with Anna Delbridge, the lead actress. She was pale, intense, and clearly frayed at the edges. Miss Delbridge, Holmes said smoothly, how well did you know Mr. Wensley? She glanced at Stratton, then back at Holmes. Well enough. He was difficult, but brilliant. Often late. Distracted, lately. But I never believed he would abandon a performance. It wasn't in his nature. Did he confide in you? She hesitated. Not in so many words, but he left a note for me. After the second rehearsal last week, she moved to her dressing table, opened a drawer, and handed Holmes a small folded paper. I read it over his shoulder. Anna, if anything happens, don't believe it was an accident. I may be gone before opening night. If I disappear, tell Holmes. He'll understand. Holmes's eyes narrowed. That was not the note of a man fleeing out of cowardice, he said, but of one anticipating betrayal. He turned to Stratton. Who was Wensley closest to in the company? Stratton considered. Apart from Anna, no one. He kept to himself, except for Mr. Varner, our prompter. They often dined together. Where might we find him? In the box office, sorting ticket stubs. We located Mr. Varner moments later, a tidy man with a pinched face and soft voice who appeared startled to be summoned so directly. I knew Fred well, he said nervously, but I can't help you. He never said anything to me. We ate together. Yes, but he was always distracted, nervous. Did he ever mention a second script? Holmes asked suddenly. Varner blinked. What? A second script. An alternate version. A duplicate performance known only to him and perhaps one other person. Varner shook his head, but Holmes's gaze lingered a moment longer, then shifted. As we stepped back out into the corridor, Holmes spoke quietly. He's lying, or at least hiding something. That hesitancy too rehearsed. And did you note the smudge of ink on his sleeve? I did, I said, but Holmes held up a hand. There is another version of the play, Watson, a secret narrative being played beneath the surface of the public performance. And I intend to read it. We shall pay Mr. Varner another visit this evening, unannounced. As we exited into the dusk, Holmes turned one last time to the theater and spoke under his breath. The final act has not yet begun, but the players are moving into position, and I felt then with a chill of certainty that we had crossed from the stage into a real drama, one in which the stakes were measured, not in applause, but in silence, betrayal and the vanishing of a man who may have known too much. That evening brought with it the kind of fog that clings to the cobblestones and dulls the glow of every gas lamp, wrapping London in a veil of secrets. Holmes and I returned to the King's Regent Theatre under its cover, our boots making little sound in the misty hush that had settled over Wellington Row. The building loomed quiet but not deserted, its great stage darkened, its corridors lightly haunted by the rustle of stagehands clearing props and murmuring low in the wings. We entered not through the front, but via the same alley we had taken before. Holmes insisting on discretion, he paused just before the door to the box office, placing a finger against his lips before quietly turning the handle. The room was modest, bare desk, an oil lamp burning low, and beside it, Arnold Varner hunched over a sheaf of papers. He was unaware of our presence for several seconds, so absorbed was he in whatever he was transcribing. Holmes waited until the scratch of the pen ceased before stepping forward. "Working late, Mr. Varner?" The prompter jolted visibly, nearly upsetting the inkwell. He turned quickly, his face pale under the lamplight. "Mr. Holmes, I didn't No," Holmes said coolly. "That much is clear." He stepped forward and lifted the top page from the desk, without waiting for permission. It was not a theater schedule, as one might expect from a man in Varner's position, but a typed script, neatly formatted, and yet unfamiliar. I scanned the top of the page. Scene 4, The Chamber of Lies. Holmes's brow arched as he read further. This is not The Prince and the Poisoned Chalice, at least not the version performed on stage. Varner stood rigid, his voice thin. "It's an early draft, one of many." Wensley was experimenting. Holmes ignored the excuse. "You knew. You helped him prepare a parallel script. One hidden from the cast. One that possibly mirrored actual events, encoded within the scenes." "I only typed what he gave me," Varner protested. "I didn't ask questions. He said it was for a private commission. A literary experiment. A literary experiment that required secrecy. Alternate lines rehearsed in private. An actor vanishing on cue and a corpse left in his place." Holmes took a step closer. "No, Mr. Varner, this script is more than art. It's a confession, or a cipher." I moved beside Holmes and looked more closely. The dialogue was curious, poetic. Yes, but laced with peculiar references. Names that seemed more symbolic than personal. The counselor, the betrayer, the masked one. A line struck me as particularly jarring. Masked one. The curtain falls not on the stage but on the council chamber. Let the Duke's silence serve as my insurance. "Holmes," I murmured, "that line, he's describing something real." "Precisely," Holmes said. "A coded allusion to the gathering Lady Sybil mentioned. The Duke is Wensley. The council chamber is no doubt a metaphor for the confidential meeting he attended. This script is his insurance policy, his leverage, but written as art, it would pass unnoticed by anyone but those involved." Varner was trembling now. "I swear to you I didn't understand it until afterward. I thought it was satire, clever nonsense." Holmes was unmoved. "And yet you kept it. You continued transcribing after he vanished." "Why? I was paid too," Varner stammered. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "By whom?" The prompter hesitated, then exhaled. "A man. He never gave his name. He came the day after Wensley disappeared. He knew everything. He said I'd receive £10 a week to finish the transcription. For archival purposes, he said. But I think he was making sure the play was never completed. Did you keep the money? Varna flushed, ashamed. Some, enough to keep quiet. But the man said if I stopped, he'd make it look like I'd helped Wensley disappear. Holmes turned to me. The trap tightens. Someone powerful wanted Wensley removed, but his story not lost. Hence this shadow play. He turned back to Varna. Where is the rest of the manuscript? In the safe, Varna admitted, behind the ledger case. Holmes retrieved the pages swiftly. They were incomplete. Act 5 was missing. But what we had already gleaned was enough to confirm Holmes's suspicion. This was not a fictional work. It was a masked chronicle of events, far more dangerous than any mere artistic drama. Back in Baker Street, Holmes laid the pages out across the floor, organizing scenes into a sequence, pinning fragments to his carpet with silver tacks. He worked past midnight, scanning, comparing, occasionally murmuring lines aloud. I sat by the fire watching him, until at last he rose and spoke. We have enough. The script is incomplete, but the message is there for those who know where to look. Wensley was being followed. He feared betrayal, and he knew, somehow, that what he had seen at Lady Sybil's gathering would either buy his safety or cost him everything. And now, I asked, do you believe he's still alive? Holmes was silent for a long moment. Yes, he said at last, because the final act is unwritten. Wensley may have gone underground willingly, but not out of cowardice. He's waiting for someone to decode the story he left behind. Then what's our next step? Holmes walked to the window and stared into the darkness beyond. We bait the trap. The man paying Varna to finish the script wants control over the narrative. Let him believe it's finished. Let him come to retrieve it. He turned, his eyes sharp and focused. Tomorrow night, Watson, we return to the theater. Not to search, but to watch. He said no more, but the tone of finality in his voice left me with the clear impression that the game so long played in shadows and silence was about to take the stage at last. The following night fell heavy with silence, the sort that settles in the lungs as much as in the ears. Holmes and I returned once more to the King's Regent Theatre, this time without ceremony, through a rear entrance whose key Holmes had obtained from a rather flustered Miss Stratton earlier in the day. Inside, the theatre was dark, save for a single gas lamp in the wings and the faint amber glow from the corridor beyond the dressing rooms. Holmes moved like a wraith, gloved hands gathering the manuscript pages Varna had completed under pressure, now reassembled and laid conspicuously upon the desk in the box office. He will come, Holmes said quietly, or someone on his behalf. The question is whether he comes to collect the script or to destroy it. We took up our positions behind the set wall nearest the box office door, crouched low, breath shallow. I clutched my revolver in one hand, heart thudding more with anticipation than fear. Holmes, on the other hand, was a sculpture of patience, still focused, utterly silent. It was just after 1 o'clock when the latch on the alley door clicked faintly, followed by the slow pad of cautious footsteps on wooden floorboards. Holmes tensed beside me. The figure moved through the corridor, past the wings, and paused at the door to the box office. The hinges gave the softest groan as it opened. A man entered, cloaked and gloved, lantern held low. His first action was not to examine the manuscript, but to scan the corners of the room. Satisfied he was alone, he crossed to the desk and began to gather the pages. Then, with a motion swift and practiced, he drew a small flask from his coat, uncorked it, and poured its contents over the top page. The acrid smell of kerosene reached us a second later. Holmes moved, then swift as a striking adder. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pinned the man's wrist against the desk with a force that made him cry out. I followed, revolver raised to find the intruder pale with shock. "Drop the flask," Holmes ordered. The man complied. We stepped into the full light of the lantern. I recognized the man instantly, though I could not quite place him. Not an actor, not stage crew, but I had seen him around the theater, once or twice lingering at the edge of rehearsals. Holmes was faster. Mr. Lane, assistant to the theater's financier, Mr. Marbury. A man of no stage talent but significant backstage presence. Lane said nothing. His face was tense with defeat. Holmes reached into the man's coat and retrieved a folded note, sealed with wax. He opened it and scanned the contents. "Watson," he said, "listen to this. The manuscript is to be taken intact. If it cannot be secured, destroy it. Do not be seen. Do not contact me again. The Duke's fate is irrelevant." Holmes turned to Lane. So, the letter was real. Wensley's disappearance was orchestrated by someone who wished to erase not just the man but the knowledge he carried. You were the messenger, but not the architect. Lane spoke then, bitterly. He said it was just a precaution, that the actor had wandered into something too large for his station, that if the script survived, it might bring scandal-wrecked reputations, even careers. "Whose?" I asked. Lane's mouth twisted. He never named names, but he said the gathering in question involved members of Parliament. Something overheard. Something recorded. "Lady Sybil's gathering," I murmured. The meeting Wensley attended. Holmes released Lane's wrist and stepped back. "You'll give a full statement to Inspector Lestrade," he said. "And I expect you'll name your benefactor before the week is out." "I'm a clerk," Lane said bitterly. "They'll eat me alive." "They may," Holmes said with something like pity. "But you'll have your name in the report instead of the obituaries. That is more than Wensley may manage unless we find him." We left Lane in the custody of a constable Holmes had arranged earlier, placed outside the alley door in anticipation. Within the hour, Lestrade himself arrived, grumbling and red-eyed, but deeply intrigued by the evidence Holmes presented. Holmes returned to Baker Street only after dawn, carrying the complete manuscript in a leather folio. He spent the next 6 hours locked in his room, parsing the text as though deciphering the enigma. At last he emerged, pale but alert, his hair unkempt and his eyes glowing. "I have it, Watson," he said. "The final scene is missing because it never existed, not in writing. But Wensley planned to act it one final performance in the real world, staged in secrecy." He laid the manuscript out before me, tapping the penultimate page. "Duke." Aside. "One waits not in shadow, but in the Hall of Echoes, where the debtors cannot find you. There the prince watches, there he waits to speak." "The Hall of Echoes," Holmes said. "A poetic phrase, yes, but also a clue. There's only one place near the theater with that moniker, an abandoned subterranean hall beneath the old Clerkenwell courthouse, once used as a debtor's archive and known by the locals as the Echo Chamber due to its curved stone walls. Surely it's sealed." "Not entirely. There's a collapsed wall connecting it indirectly to the same tunnel system we explored beneath the theater." Wensley wrote his own escape route. "He fled there, Watson. He's hiding beneath the city, waiting for someone to piece together the script." That night, lanterns in hand, we returned once more to the tunnel beneath the King's Regent. Holmes led with precision, taking the fork we had earlier ignored. After nearly 30 minutes underground, we reached a crumbling stone wall where mortar had given way to time. Holmes tested the edge with his cane, and the wall shifted inward with a low groan. Beyond it was a domed space, its walls scarred with soot and graffiti. And there, seated at a makeshift desk surrounded by scraps of paper and a cold lamp, was Frederick Wensley. He stood as we entered, his face thinner, his beard rough, but his eyes sharp with relief. "You found it," he said. Holmes nodded once. "Your play, Mr. Wensley, was never going to close quietly." Wensley exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering for the first time in days. "Then it's time," he said. "Time to finish the performance." And with that I knew the final act had indeed begun. The return of Frederick Wensley from the shadowed vaults beneath Clerkenwell was not a triumphant affair. Holmes insisted we take every precaution, avoiding the front streets and traveling instead by a rented brougham that met us at a secondary entrance to the disused cellar. The man who emerged from the dark was not the proud Duke of Elverton the London stage once applauded, but a figure gaunt from solitude, hunched with exhaustion and weary to the point of paranoia. Yet there was strength behind his pale eyes, an intelligence that had not dulled, only retreated behind the veil of necessity. We brought him to Baker Street under the pretext of secrecy. Holmes knew that news of Wensley's reappearance must not reach the ears of those who had sought to silence him. Until the matter was concluded and every thread drawn tight, Wensley would remain a ghost to all but a trusted few. He sat beside the fire, warming hands that trembled slightly, despite the heat. I prepared tea and observed him quietly. Holmes stood near the mantel, studying the actor with the intensity of a man reading a ciphered message. "I knew someone would come," Wensley said at last, voice hoarse from disuse. "I didn't expect it would take so long." "It would have taken longer," Holmes said, "if not for your script, a curious gambit encoding truth in fiction." Wensley nodded slowly. "It was the only way I could speak without speaking. I knew I was being watched. Any letter, any confession would be intercepted, but a play, who would question another rewritten act? You feared for your life," I said gently. "I knew it," he replied. "They made it perfectly clear. One of them came to my dressing room, a man I'd never met, but who knew too much. He told me I was dabbling in matters of state, and that a second performance would not be tolerated. I disappeared the next night." Holmes stepped forward, his tone sharp. "Who are they, Wensley? Who attended that gathering at Lady Sybil's estate? Who heard you speak, and who wanted to erase you from the stage of public life?" Wensley exhaled. "There were several. I did not know all their names, only their voices. One of them, Marbury, the theater's financier, spoke openly about a proposed bill that would channel funds into military expansions under the guise of municipal development. He mentioned bribery, assignments awarded without public tender, names of ministers whispered in the same breath as shipping contracts. I was in the wrong place, and I made the greater error of listening and recording." Holmes asked. Wensley hesitated, then nodded. "Not by design. I had a habit of scribbling lines in a notebook during long conversations for future use. Dialogue, inflections, unusual phrases, harmless practice. Except this time, I wrote down words that weren't meant to survive daylight. Somehow, someone saw the notes, and I was marked." Holmes turned and paced once. "So you crafted a play, used allegory to capture the essence of what you heard, and entrusted it to Varner, who didn't understand the weight of what he was transcribing. Then you arranged your own disappearance." "I timed it with the curtain cue," Wensley said. "The tunnel was already known to me. I discovered it months earlier, exploring backstage after hours. I thought it nothing more than a curiosity, until I needed a way out, and the body found behind Bow Street Station. I have no idea who that was," Wensley said grimly, "but I know it was meant to be me." Holmes nodded. "A substitute. A man chosen for his resemblance to you, costumed, perhaps drugged and left to die. The corpse was a misdirection, sufficient to placate the police and remove you from public thought." Wensley looked away, ashamed. "I wanted to come out sooner, but the moment I did, I knew I would be followed again. I had no proof, only that play, and I feared even that would be destroyed." Holmes retrieved the completed manuscript and placed it on the table. "It survives." "Barely. Lane attempted to burn it last night. He's now in custody, and the letter he carried, marked only with the initial H, points us to your true antagonist." Wensley leaned forward. "Do you know who it is?" "I have a strong suspicion," Holmes said. "But suspicions do not carry the weight of evidence. That is where your testimony must come in." "You want me to go to the police?" "Not yet," Holmes replied. "First we stage one final performance." He walked to the fireplace, then turned to face us both. "The men behind this affair believe you are dead, that their plan succeeded, that the manuscript has been destroyed. We shall let them continue in that belief, long enough to draw them into the open. They will try to finalize whatever arrangement they feared your knowledge might derail. We will intercept that meeting. And when they appear, so shall you." "But how?" I asked. You propose to confront these men in the act. In their own language, Watson, Holmes said. With theater, with illusion. The next morning was spent in preparation. Holmes visited Lestrade, briefing him with carefully curated facts, and gaining the support of the Yard to remain nearby but unannounced. He arranged a discreet meeting with Lady Sybil, who, when told the truth of Wensley's survival, reacted not with horror, but a strange relief. I suspected, she confessed. But I feared knowing would cost me more than ignorance. You'll assist us? Holmes asked. I will. That night, Holmes arranged a private performance at the King's Regent, under the guise of a final commemorative run of The Prince and the Poisoned Chalice. Invitations were sent to a carefully selected few. Among them, Miss Marbury, the theatre's financier, and several men of rank, all present at Lady Sybil's ill-fated gathering. Each received a note marked only with the initials HV and a line from the original manuscript. Let us meet where the script and silence begin. They arrived as Holmes predicted. Late, reluctant, wary, the curtain rose on an empty stage. Then lights dimmed and a voice rang out from the shadows. It was Wensley, but not as the Duke of Elverton. This time he played himself. He stood beneath the proscenium and told his story, not with dramatics but with calm, irrefutable truth. Every word matched the manuscript, every moment laced with meaning only those in the audience could decipher. Holmes stood at the rear of the theatre, beside Lestrade and two uniformed constables. As Wensley concluded, the trap closed. Several men tried to leave early, but the doors were guarded. One, Lord Halberton, tried to protest, but his voice cracked at the edge of guilt. Within the hour, Holmes had the names he needed. Back at Baker Street, well past midnight, I poured Holmes a brandy and sat beside him, utterly drained but deeply moved. You orchestrated it all, I said. You turned a vanished man into his own testimony. Holmes smiled faintly. Every man plays a part. Watson, Wensley merely wrote his lines more carefully than most. And the man behind the curtain? He'll face trial, Holmes said. But his true sentence is this. The silence he tried to enforce has become a performance impossible to forget. I looked into the fire, the flames casting long shadows across the floor. And what of Wensley? He'll live, Holmes said. And for once, not in fiction. Then he rose, the case behind him, and turned to the window, already watching the fog for the next mystery to come. Walking through it. 2 days passed. The morning papers ablaze with whispers of an unnamed political scandal uncovered during a private performance at the King's Regent. Names were not printed, but speculation ran rampant. One paper suggested the revival of The Prince and the Poisoned Chalice had caused a diplomatic flurry among gentlemen of station, while another hinted darkly at a subterranean conspiracy involving forged identities, theatrical sabotage, and a vanished playwright returned from the dead. Amidst the intrigue, Holmes remained curiously still, reading each article in silence, sometimes with a faint, unreadable smile. But beneath the calm, I sensed his mind was still engaged, still watching the stage for the final twist. For even as Marbury and Lord Halberton were quietly placed under investigation, Holmes had not declared the matter closed, nor had he moved on to another case. He continued pacing the sitting room at irregular intervals, his violin untouched, and the play manuscript remained open on the desk, its final page missing. It was that missing page that preoccupied him now, not merely as a detail, but as the final movement in a composition that lacked its crescendo. Something is unresolved, Watson, he said, that morning, as the fog again pressed in upon the window panes. We have the actor, the script, the conspirators, yet I cannot shake the feeling that we've missed the most important cue. I paused in the act of buttering toast. Surely the plot has played out, Holmes. We've exposed the men who sought to erase Wensley, preserve the manuscript, and ensure the truth reached the proper ears. Exactly, he said, eyes gleaming with the chill clarity that always preceded his sharper deductions. Too precisely. Every element resolved, too tidy, too pat. Marbury and Halberton were implicated. Yes, but how? By a performance. A single night's theater. which means the question is no longer who conspired, but who guided the play to its ending. You believe someone manipulated the outcome? I believe someone wrote an ending none of us saw. I frowned. Then who? He turned away from the window and picked up a small envelope from the mantel, a note that had arrived that morning, delivered by hand and addressed to Holmes in a script both elegant and unmistakable. It was from Lady Sybil. She requested Holmes's presence at her townhouse, stating only that she had found something curious among her private effects, something she believed he should see. There was no mention of Wensley, no reference to the recent scandal. The tone was reserved, almost formal, but there was an urgency beneath the ink that Holmes did not ignore. He tucked the note into his coat. "We shall go at once, Watson. If I am correct, the true playwright of this affair is not Wensley, but someone with a firmer grasp of the stage and a far greater motive for orchestration." Lady Sybil received us in a smaller salon than before. Gone was the imperious poise she had displayed during our first meeting. She looked worn, the kind of fatigue that no cosmetic could conceal. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea, though she did not drink it. "I do not sleep well," she admitted quietly. After Holmes asked after her health, "The affair has cast long shadows. I fear the curtain has not yet fallen, Lady Sybil," Holmes replied. "You mentioned you had found something." She nodded and reached to a small lacquered box on the escritoire beside her. From it she produced a single folded page, worn at the edges but unmistakably of the same paper stock and formatting as the rest of Wensley's manuscript. Holmes unfolded it with care. I leaned closer to read. Active I. Scene I. A room without applause. Duke to the masked one. "You knew I would not remain silent. You wrote the final words yourself. The curtain rises, not to end the tale, but to reveal the author. Masked one. Then let it fall. Let the audience believe they saw the play you performed, but never show them the one I directed." A pause. Silence. The Duke removes the mask from the masked one. Blackout. Holmes read the scene twice, lips moving soundlessly. Then he turned to Lady Sybil. "Where did you find this?" "In my bureau," she said, "tucked into a copy of Julius Caesar that I keep beside the guest bed. It was not there before." Holmes gave a soft exhale. "It's Wensley's, and it's not a scene meant for public performance. It's the truth in full metaphor." "You think Wensley left it?" I asked. "No," Holmes said, eyes narrowing. "Wensley never wrote an ending. He vanished before he could. This is a fabrication, one crafted to seal the tale." He turned to Lady Sybil. "Tell me, was the manuscript ever out of your possession before I saw it?" She shook her head slowly. "Only Varner and I had access to the safe where it was kept." Holmes was silent a moment longer, then nodded to himself. "Of course, the prompter. The man who reads the lines, but never speaks them aloud. The hidden hand of every production." "You think Varner forged the ending?" I said, startled. "I think he wrote it," Holmes replied, "and I think he has done so before." He strode across the salon and stood by the fireplace, fingers pressed together. Varner knew too much from the beginning. He claimed innocence, but the pacing of his confession was deliberate. He played both sides. Watson, first transcribing for Wensley, then taking payment from Lane, and finally preserving the play under the guise of fear. But what if that fear was a performance as well? What if Varner realized that both sides had value and chose to write the ending himself? To what end? Lady Sybil asked. "To protect the play," Holmes said, "but also to shape it, to become the unseen architect of a scandal without bearing its consequences. The anonymous voice in the wings, the true masked one." Lady Sybil looked deeply troubled. But then Wensley's return, the performance, the confession, was it all directed? "In part, yes," Holmes said. But Wensley believed he was reclaiming his truth. He did not know the script had been finished for him. And that is the final deception. He turned to me, his expression resolute. "We must speak with Varner. Tonight." By twilight we had returned once more to the King's Regent, where Varner was found organizing a stack of ledger books in the theater office. He greeted us nervously, but without surprise. "I thought you might come," he said. "You've read the last page." Holmes didn't bother with pleasantries. "You wrote it." Varner hesitated, then lowered his gaze. "Yes," he said. "I had to. Wensley was gone." The play had no resolution, and without it, no one would have understood what he risked. I knew his rhythm, his phrasing. I'd transcribed everything. I gave it the ending it deserved. Holmes stepped closer. "Or the one you preferred." I made no lies. Varner said defensively. "Only shaped the truth." Holmes's voice was ice. "You manipulated perception, framed the conclusion to suit your narrative. You became the final hand, and in doing so, you made yourself invisible." Varner gave a tired smile. "Isn't that what every prompter does?" For a moment, none of us spoke. Holmes studied him, this small, pale man who had moved unseen through the heart of the mystery. Then he nodded once. "You will submit a statement to Lestrade," he said. "Explain everything. I won't have Wensley's truth twisted into theater. The audience may applaud the illusion, but I prefer the truth behind the curtain." That night Holmes returned to Baker Street and sat by the fire, silent for a long while. Then, as I prepared to retire, he finally spoke. "The case is closed, Watson. But the question remains. Who writes the ending? The man who lives it, or the man who survives to tell it?" I had no answer, and Holmes asked for none. The following day brought with it a peculiar stillness, as if London itself were holding its breath after the revelations of the past week. The King's Regent Theatre remained closed, officially for technical renovations, but in truth to allow the storm to pass publicly. Wensley's reappearance had not been acknowledged. The authorities, with Holmes's guidance, maintained the illusion of his death until the legal proceedings against Marbury and Halberton were too far advanced as to reverse. In our rooms at Baker Street, Holmes sat by the window, the morning's light cutting through the fog to paint the floor in pale streaks. He had not touched his violin in days, nor opened his chemistry set. Instead, he held the manuscript in his lap, that singular play which had become both map and mirror to a buried truth. He thumbed through its pages once more, pausing at intervals to study lines as if searching for something not in the words themselves but in their absences. "I have often said, Watson," he murmured, "that the art of detection lies not in what is seen, but in what is missing, and I find myself troubled once more by what is not here." I lowered my paper. "You still believe we've overlooked something?" Holmes did not answer at once. Instead, he lifted the final page, Varner's manufactured ending, and held it to the light. "It is convincing, yes, subtle, well-paced, but it bears Varner's cadence, not Wensley's. And yet," he turned it slightly, revealing a faint impression on the back. "There is another hand here, a shadow of graphite, barely perceptible unless angled toward the window." I stepped forward. The indentations were faint, scribbles overlapping strokes, but clearly the result of someone having written atop a previous sheet with heavy pressure. Holmes retrieved a soft pencil and began gently shading across the blank reverse of the page. Slowly, ghostly letters emerged, curved, deliberate, and written in Wensley's unmistakable script. He read aloud, "If this finds you, the ending is not yet written. Trust only Anna. The rest is in the chamber." Holmes straightened abruptly, his eyes now blazing with clarity. He knew someone would attempt to alter the manuscript. This message, hidden, never spoken aloud, was a final contingency. The chamber. "He cannot mean the underground vault. We've already searched it." "Then what?" I asked. "Not what, where." He paced swiftly to the bookshelf and pulled a well-thumbed copy of a guide to London's historic theatres. Flipping rapidly, he stopped at a page describing the original architecture of the King's Regent. "Here," he said, "the green room. Not the modern dressing chamber, but the original rehearsal salon above the proscenium. It was sealed off decades ago, too small, unsafe by fire regulations, but never demolished. The rest is in the chamber." I repeated. "You think Wensley left something there?" I know he did, Holmes said, already reaching for his coat. And if Anna Delbridge knows of it as well, then we must speak to her before anyone else does. We arrived at Miss Delbridge's lodgings on the south end of Charlotte Street, modest, spare, yet neat. She opened the door herself, surprised but not alarmed to see us. Her face had changed in the past week, less pale, more composed. She had not performed since Wensley's disappearance, and the news of his survival kept from the public had reached her only the day before under Holmes's explicit instructions. "I hoped you'd return," she said. "I was about to write to you. There's something I haven't told anyone, not even Fred." She gestured us inside, and from a small box atop her writing desk, she withdrew a folded slip of paper. "He gave me this the day before he vanished. Told me to keep it secret. He said, if they get to me, go to the room above the stage, the chamber where truth waits its cue." I didn't understand at the time. I thought it was metaphor. Fred loved metaphor. Holmes took the note and compared it to the indentations on the manuscript. "Identical phrasing," he said, "and now we know exactly where to go." An hour later, we were back within the bowels of the King's Regent, this time with the building empty and the key in Holmes's pocket. We ascended a narrow wooden staircase behind the back curtain, up past the rigging loft, until we reached a door so small and warped by time that it barely seemed usable. Holmes tested the rusted latch. It resisted, groaned, then gave. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and memory. The room was long and narrow, with cracked wooden floors and soot-darkened walls. A pair of warped benches lay on their sides, and a half-rotted wardrobe stood beneath a narrow window, shuttered and nailed closed. But Holmes paid these no mind. He went directly to the mantelpiece on the far wall, little more than a warped slab above a bricked-in hearth, and knelt. "There," he said. The plaster disturbed. He used his cane to pry at the edge of the bricks. One came free with a dry snap. Behind it lay a cloth-wrapped bundle tightly secured with twine. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside were two items: a second notebook, bound in brown leather and heavy with writing, and a pocket recorder, the kind used by actors to rehearse lines in solitude. Holmes examined both without speaking. He opened the notebook, skimmed a few pages, then closed it with a snap. "Everything," he said, "is here. Names, dates, places, conversations overheard, plans discussed, even diagrams of forged contracts. This is not a manuscript. It is a dossier, and it is damning." He lifted the recorder. "And this, I suspect, is the voice of at least one of the men who thought Wensley dead." He turned to me. "We were wrong, Watson. The final act was not Wensley's testimony. It was this. He planted a seed and let the performance distract the audience while the truth lay hidden, waiting." I nodded slowly. "Then it was never about the play. The play was the misdirection." Holmes smiled faintly. "Yes, and the greatest illusion of all." He turned to Anna Delbridge, who had stood silently until now, her face unreadable. "You were part of it," he said softly. "You helped him place the bundle. You were the only one who could reach this room unnoticed." She didn't deny it. "I helped because he trusted me, and because I knew he'd be hunted if he tried to expose the truth alone." "And you never came forward?" "Would anyone have believed an actress?" she said bitterly. "No. This way he had a chance." Holmes nodded. "And now the play ends, properly, this time." That evening, back in Baker Street, we listened to the recordings. The voice of Marbury, clear, unguarded, arrogant, discussing kickbacks, fabricated subsidies, and a meeting at Lady Sybil's estate. There could be no doubt. The evidence was real and fine. Lestrade was summoned. Warrants followed. And in less than a fortnight, arrests were made. Not only Marbury and Halberton, but two additional figures named in the ledger, one of whom had once chaired a parliamentary oversight committee. The case that had begun with a man vanishing through a curtain ended not with a curtain call, but with a reckoning. And when I turned to Holmes that night, asking if he now considered the mystery complete, he gave me a rare smile, quiet, distant, and satisfied. "Not every truth belongs on the stage, Watson," he said, "but some deserve an audience all the same." Then he turned back to the manuscript, not to read but to close it carefully. Finally, it was nearly a week after the last of the arrests when Holmes and I finally allowed ourselves the rare indulgence of a quiet evening by the fire. The spring air had begun to soften the harshness of London's winds, and though a fine mist still clung to the rooftops, the season's change felt unmistakable. The storm had passed. The case, the strange, spiraling puzzle of a vanished man, a fabricated performance, and a manuscript that walked the knife edge between fiction and confession, had resolved itself with a precision that even I, long accustomed to Holmes's victories, found staggering. Yet I noticed, as I poured his tea and we settled into our chairs, that Holmes's gaze lingered longer than usual on the manuscript now resting sealed and bound atop his writing desk. He had returned it to its original form, removed Varner's forged final page, and placed Wensley's recovered journal alongside it in a separate folio. "Tell me, Holmes," I said, "do you consider this matter concluded?" He raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" I hesitated. "The guilty parties are in custody. Wensley is safe. The truth, as you often say, has been pulled into the light. I would call that resolution." He gave a faint smile, but said nothing for a long moment. When he did speak, his voice was lower, more contemplative. "Watson, there is a curious emptiness that follows the conclusion of a performance. The audience applauds, the curtain falls, the actors bow, and yet the story still lingers. Its shadows cling to the wings, its consequences echo." "You think something remains?" I asked, startled. "I think," he said carefully, "that we have seen the final act, but I question whether we fully understand who wrote it." I leaned forward. "You doubt Wensley?" "No, not his integrity, but his awareness. He planted the truth with great care. Yes, but he relied on others to interpret it. Anna Delbridge, Varner, myself. And in doing so, he created the conditions for a story to evolve without his consent. The question I keep returning to is, what if the most dangerous playwright in this entire affair was not the man who vanished, but the one who stayed hidden in plain sight?" My thoughts jumped instantly to Varner. "You believe he still holds something back?" "Possibly. But more than that, I believe he understood what Wensley did not. That to manipulate truth through narrative, to direct it, is a power more lasting than a confession." He stood, crossed the room, and removed a slim envelope from within the folio. "I received this yesterday, anonymously." I took the sheet and read it. It was brief. "The curtain never truly falls, Mr. Holmes. It merely waits in darkness for the next cue." A silent prompter. There was no signature, no return address. I looked up. "You think it's Varner?" "I think it is someone who understands that stagecraft and subterfuge are two sides of the same coin. Someone who watched the events unfold, not with the panic of the accused, but with the cold eye of a dramatist ensuring his play would reach its audience." "Then what does it mean?" I asked. "A threat?" Holmes shook his head. "No, not a threat. A reminder that truth, once revealed, is never still. That every revelation invites interpretation, and that there will always be someone waiting to shape the next version of events." He returned to his chair and picked up his cup. "We have done what was just, but we must not mistake justice for conclusion." I was silent for a long time, absorbing this. The idea that even in victory we might be part of a larger narrative, one manipulated by unseen hands, troubled me more than I cared to admit. It was comforting to think of cases as problems to be solved, plots to be unraveled, less so to consider ourselves actors on a stage written by others. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, Holmes remained seated by the hearth, the firelight casting long shadows across the room. He had reopened the manuscript and was not reading, but merely watching it, like a man waiting for a book to write its own next page. At breakfast the following morning, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Hudson brought in a small, battered parcel, unmarked, save for a ribbon wrapped around it in red silk. Holmes opened it with care, revealing a single object within. A theater mask. Plain. Ivory. Featureless. There was no note. No explanation. Holmes held it for a long moment, then turned it over in his hands. On the inner curve, just above where the wearer's cheek would rest, were 3 words etched faintly into the surface. Echoes always remain. Neither of us spoke, but I felt, in that moment, that some invisible curtain had shifted again. The play we thought closed had not ended, only paused, and someone somewhere still waited for their next entrance. Holmes finally set the mask on the mantel beside his pipe. "There is a kind of brilliance in knowing when not to speak," he said. "The silent figures in the wings may do more to shape a tale than those who perform it." "You think he's still guiding it?" I said quietly. Holmes nodded once. "Guiding or watching, either is dangerous." We said nothing more that morning. The world beyond our window resumed its usual rhythm. Cabs clattering, newsboys shouting, the fog rising over rooftops like a great velvet curtain. But I could not help but glance, now and then, toward that pale mask resting near the fire. For while justice had been served and truth revealed, I knew, as Holmes did, the man who vanished through a curtain had returned. But somewhere behind us, someone else was still writing, still waiting, still listening. And the story, whatever its next shape, had not yet delivered its final line. The days that followed brought no further packages, no cryptic messages. London slipped gradually into its spring rhythms. Omnibuses clattered, the park stirred with green, and even the fog seemed to lighten its touch. Yet in Baker Street, Holmes remained still. The manuscript, the recordings, the mask, all had been catalogued, copies secured, and statements submitted. Varner had agreed under considerable pressure to provide a full written account of his role. Though charges were unlikely, he had accepted Holmes's condition. He was never to work in London's theatre circuit again. It was a quiet exile, and perhaps in its own way, more permanent than bars. Still, a thread remained. One last knot Holmes could not leave untied. That knot was Lady Sybil. He returned to her house alone, one afternoon, leaving me with only a cryptic remark. The author of a play must know how it ends, not merely what the audience saw, but what was left in the wings. He did not return until after dark. When he entered our sitting room, his expression was unreadable. "Well?" I asked. He removed his gloves, slowly. "She knew," he said. "Knew what?" "That the final page, the true one, existed. She helped Wensley conceal it, not out of fear, but out of control. She wanted to direct the damage. I was taken aback, but she aided our investigation. She guided it," Holmes said softly, "with a steady hand. It was she who gave Wensley sanctuary at her estate when the danger first arose. She who encouraged him to turn his account into art, knowing it could serve as both shield and weapon. And when she believed he had died, she made peace with burying the truth. But when he returned, when the manuscript resurfaced, she understood that the story would no longer be hers to contain." He stared into the fire for a moment. "She did not commit a crime, but she authored the conditions of one. And in doing so, she shaped every scene." I said nothing, absorbing the implications. Holmes stood, then placed something on the desk between us. It was another note, unsealed. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Lady Sybil's, Mr. Holmes. Some truths demand performance, others silence. I leave it to you to determine which ours has earned. I shall not speak again on this matter. V.C." Holmes folded the note and returned it to the desk. "I shall not pursue her," he said. "There is no case to try, and no jury fit to judge what she did. She preserved her world, quietly, precisely, and now she steps back into shadow. And Wensley, he's left London, Anna with him. I doubt we'll see them again." A faint smile touched his lips. "But I expect the provinces may be treated to a few compelling new dramas in the coming years. Allegorical tales, no doubt, with veils as thin as muslin." I nodded. There was something quietly right about it. Wensley, once hunted for his knowledge, now using it in the open, so long as it wore a mask. That was the paradox of theater. It could say what reality could not. Holmes returned to his chair and reached for his violin. For the first time in days he played. The notes were low and melancholy at first, but they swelled gradually into something clearer, cleaner, a final cadence, like the end of a scene. At last, he lowered the bow. "Well, Watson," he said, "what have we learned?" I leaned back. That a man can disappear more completely through silence than through flight. That truth can be spoken from the stage with greater safety than from a witness box. And that some curtains once drawn do not rise again. Holmes gave a slight nod, and for the first time since the beginning of the affair, he allowed himself to exhale. "Indeed," he said, "the play is ended." Outside, the gaslights flickered, and London resumed its quiet, endless act. Inside, for once, there was peace, and the man who vanished through a curtain, he remained vanished, but this time by choice.